Okay, so let's take a moment to discuss some, whether or not problem-oriented policing POP is, something that you want, is desirable, for one reason or another, right? So typically, when this first came out, right, we noted that this is, very proactive, and that this is usually something that can be, tailor-made to solve certain problems, right? It provided they're identified well, they're responded to well, and then the efficacy of a treatment is involved, right? So, along with this, right, they really want to empower officers, to make their own decisions, make their own observations, create their own solutions, perhaps. So, if we empower them and, give them the resources they need, we're creating agency. The officers have the ability to do what they wish. They feel like they have some control in it. It's not necessarily going to be overseen from like a central department. And so we allow them to use their discretion to solve a problem. So in general, right, if we have agencies who comply, right? So they spend, a lot of time identifying a problem, they're assessing it, they're responding to it, and then they, are doing a thorough analysis, right? This has shown to be an effective technique, right, that agencies can use, right? So, this is the kind of thing that's often been used for, open air drug markets. It's been used for, people who are carrying guns. This has been used for maybe like streetcar racing. I think that's correct. I don't know if I'm remembering that correctly, right? And this is often, led to a big expansion of like crime analytic departments, right? People who are looking and analyzing crime patterns, right, to identify like what exactly is happening, try to find commonalities, generate a predictive model to like predict crime, where it's going to be and analyze patterns. So this has become, and this is growing, especially in larger agencies, growing to serve as a foundation for crime prevention, right? Which is ultimately what police should do. So there are maybe some good things that we like about this, right? That seem very attractive, and in some ways, right, this has really served as like a big push that police departments should operate in this framework in order to make this happen. So what else do we do then, right? So this is true. If we make this happen, what's maybe not so good? We'll use a different color then. So what's not so good? Well, I don't know. We'll call this the not so good section. So this program is only going to be good, or this model is only going to be good if there is, high fidelity or commitment to the process, right? This is going to include, problem identification. So is it more than just like there's some hoodlums around, or is it actually going to be, more invested, actually trying to find patterns into what is happening and what is not, right? It's also typically going to be effective, right, if people can look beyond police functions, right? So, for example, right, if we think of police as their only job is to make crime go down and to enforce law and arrest people and stuff like that, then, really their toolbox is limited in what they can actually do to reduce crime, right? So, if they're not willing to work with other city agencies, if they're not looking to work with, other aspects of the city government or city resources or the state or something like that, then your options are limited. So if these options for curtailing a problem, so if you have our options are limited, we do also have to consider that, the outcomes may not be as good as we desire. Given that our ultimate goal is to reduce crime across different ways, right? This may be fine. So other people, or may not be good. Otherwise, other people may claim, right, that this is, falling, outside the purview of police work, or at least traditional police work. And as a result, police departments, maybe don't want to endorse it, right? They feel like, maybe, I don't know, maybe someone's stealing their thunder or whatever, right? As a result of that, this creates a problem because if it's happening outside, there's not like a real buy-in into what's happening, and it's really, not going to be effective. So we need, something like a little bit more going on. The other part to consider, too, is that, assessment isn't always the best. Police departments aren't always going to, look to see, did this crime actually decrease, right? Or did we displace it to different areas? And so we didn't actually, correct the problem, but we moved it, like around the corner, right? So, or if we look at certain outcomes, we're looking at maybe the wrong kind of outcomes, right? We're not looking at, the externalities of an issue, right? So there is a, externality issue where the program and, what we had to correct a problem, may have harmed something else, is what I mean by that. Which is a whole set of different issues. So in this then, there are some issues as well. Plus the fact that if we, some people want to restrict the discretion of officers because some people may believe they may have poor discretion, and it may or may not be like a good thing, depending on like who you are or what your view of police are. At that point, it creates a problem, right? That we don't necessarily know like what to do then, because if our goal is to restrict a restrict behavior in some meaningful way, then this is maybe not something that we should consider doing then. So what's the other part that we have going into this? Let's talk about a little bit about measurement issues that are related to these kinds of studies. So the first thing is going to be, if we think about hardcore measurement issues, right? There's going to be this issue of measuring a problem and what it is, and oftentimes, right, there will be or I guess not measurement issues, but research issues is a better word. Or there'll be poor, experimental design because there isn't a control group, there isn't a good comparison point. Also, as we spoke about earlier, when we start thinking about outcomes, there may not consider diffusion or effects of crime or something like that. There's also issues about, how you identify a problem and label it. could affect the outcome, right? So, if it's labeled poorly or it's not, like labeled well, or you're only targeting certain areas and you're not, being sweeping with that, then, that's an important issue to do as well, right? The other part is like, we don't necessarily, define treatment well. Define treatment isn't necessarily good. And so there could be poor implementation, poor delivery of a treatment, or maybe it changes depending on who's in power, who's in office, if there's a chief change or something like that. So all these can sort of like negate, what may or may not be a good or bad thing. Excuse me. There's also, actual like implementation issues, right? So one is that this is gonna, create, put a implementation imp issues. So one is going to be there's always going to be an issue about like if there needs to be a specific department or like program in an agency to take care of this, right? A lot of smaller agencies can't really do this, but this may be reserved for a larger agency, so it's limited in who this could be most applicable for. Officers, if they don't have the backup from city or county agencies, really going to do police work. So, the officer issue, in the sense that they may not be the only option, it depends on external resources to assist in this problem. It's also, when we think about, it also is important to, define what success looks like. If we don't decide like this is the target that what we're, aiming for, maybe that's 20% reduction or 10% reduction, complete elimination seems unlikely, but without this problem definition, or not defining what success looks like, it's harder to tell what's going to happen, right? We also have to consider about diffusion effects, which I already spoke about earlier. There's also issues related to targeting issues in the sense of like where treatments are developed. So if we target certain neighborhoods and we see most problems, right, you could have long-standing issues where a community feels under attack, or they feel like they're being unjustly targeted, or it's an uneven application of law or enforcement as well. And that may very often happen in areas that are low poverty or areas of high ethnic minorities. And that can create, a belief system that may be true, or at least perceived to be true, of a bias, racial bias that's occurring, or just a bias in general, right? We also have issues about, if you, target like a business or a hotel or of some kind, right? They may not be able to do the changes, so that maybe there's some code violation, or for whatever reason they just can't do it, right? But you've threatened them because of that. Now that business is out of is out just because they were targeted and there's a harm that has been created because of that. So all this is saying is that problem oriented policing has a whole host of issues to consider. In general, it's seen to be as effective. But there is, some concerns we can think about in terms of policy that goes in place. One other thing, right, when we think about the policy cost, is that since we start bleeding into different departments, different agencies, how they cost, right, the cost can skyrocket depending on what it is, right? And so this again always leads to important questions about how much crime reduction is worth it for this to feel like it's okay. The other part too is that police are going to be motivated by their ability to get crime down. But if they partner with other agencies, they are evaluated by other terms, other processes, other programs, and as a result, they may have conflicting views about what looks like success, and that can doesn't always pair well. depending on what it is. So to the extent that there is headbutting involved and different emphasis on certain items, right? Like that mission is going to conflict, right? So it requires a good established partnership. Otherwise, the program isn't necessarily going to work to its fullest extent. But with that, we'll kind of conclude this section on problem